The night the storm knocked out the power, I realized something wasn't right. It had been one of those evenings, the kind that made you wish for simpler times. The rain was pounding against the windows, the wind howling like some tortured animal. The kids were at my parents' house for the weekend, and Megan and I had planned a cozy night in. I lit a few candles while she rummaged around the kitchen for snacks, and we settled into the living room with a bottle of wine. Halfway through the second glass, she got a text. It was hard not to notice. Her phone lit up the entire side of her face in the dim room. She glanced at it, smirked in a way I hadn't seen in a while, and excused herself to check on something upstairs. I remember laughing and saying, "What, the Wi-Fi router? Pretty sure that's out too." She shot me a nervous smile and disappeared before I could press the joke. That should have been my first clue. I sat there for a while, sipping my wine, staring into the candle flames. But the weird thing? I swear I could feel it, the weight of her absence. There was a restlessness in the air, an itch that wouldn't go away. After 15 minutes, I got up to check on her. She wasn't in the bedroom, not in the bathroom, not even in the study where she liked to work. I was about to head back downstairs when I heard it, a hushed voice coming from the garage. Now, Megan isn't exactly the type to hang out in the garage, especially during a storm. I cracked the door open, careful not to make a sound. That's when I saw her. She was leaning against the workbench, holding her phone like it was the most precious thing in the world. But it wasn't the phone that got my attention, it was the way she was talking. Her voice was soft, low, and filled with something I couldn't quite place. Intensity? Desire? Whatever it was, it didn't belong to me. I stood there in the shadows, frozen. She wasn't just whispering, she was laughing in that way people do when they're trying to charm someone. Her free hand traced lazy patterns on the workbench, and her body language screamed intimacy. It wasn't just the words that betrayed her, it was everything about her. And then she said something that stopped my heart cold. "Don't worry, he has no idea." Who the hell was she talking to? The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open. Megan flinched, dropping the phone onto the workbench like it burned her. For a second, we locked eyes, and in that brief moment, I saw something in her face I didn't recognize, panic, maybe, or guilt. Whatever it was out of place, wrong. It wasn't the Megan I'd been married to for over a decade. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, my voice calm, almost too calm. She scrambled to gather herself, swiping at her hair like it had somehow betrayed her too. "I thought I heard something," she said quickly. "I wanted to check the garage door." I glanced over at the door, bolted shut and as secure as ever. "During a storm? Without telling me?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. She was calculating, trying to find the right words to explain away what I had just walked in on. I gave her a little space, hoping she'd dig her own hole. "I heard something strange," she tried again, the words tumbling out too fast. "I thought it might be the wind, or, I don't know, an animal or something." "Funny," I said, stepping further into the garage. "It sounded like you were talking to someone." Her face froze, just for an instant, and I knew I'd hit the mark. Megan was quick, though, always had been. She forced a laugh that came out tight and unconvincing. "I wasn't talking to anyone. You probably just heard me muttering to myself." I moved closer, my eyes dropping to the phone on the workbench. "So you weren't on the phone just now?" She followed my gaze and placed her hand over it like she was protecting a secret. "Dave, you're being ridiculous. What's this about?" I stared at her, silent, letting the tension stretch between us. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing in that garage. "Unlock it," I said finally, pointing at the phone. "What?" "Your phone. Unlock it." "Let me see." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Megan had always been stubborn, but she also knew when she was cornered. This was one of those moments. "You don't trust me?" she asked, trying to shift the focus back onto me. Classic deflection. "After all these years, you're really going to pull this jealous husband crap? Don't do that, Megan. Don't make this about me." Just unlock the phone. She hesitated, her fingers twitching like she wanted to grab it and run. Then, slowly, she picked it up and pressed the power button. The screen lit up, but instead of unlocking it, she held it tightly, glaring at me. "This is insane," she said, her voice rising. "I'm not going to let you go through my phone like I'm some criminal. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Then prove me wrong," I shot back, my own voice sharper now. "If there's nothing to hide, then what's the problem? Unless, of course, you do have something to hide." Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that didn't exist. Then she did the thing I least expected. She pressed the power button again, shutting off the screen, and shoved the phone into her pocket. "You're being paranoid," she said, pushing past me toward the door. "I'm not going to entertain this ridiculous behavior." I stood there for a moment, stunned. She had just walked away, like that was the end of it. Like I was supposed to let it go. But I wasn't going to let it go. The rest of the night passed in a blur of tension. Megan acted like nothing had happened, even making small talk about the storm and the kids. I played along, pretending to watch TV while my mind raced. Something was definitely going on, and if she wasn't going to tell me, I was going to find out on my own. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I made my move. Her phone was on the nightstand, unattended for the first time since our standoff in the garage. My heart pounded as I grabbed it, praying she hadn't changed her passcode. She hadn't. The screen unlocked, and I immediately went to her messages. I didn't even have to scroll far, there it was, a string of texts from someone saved as KP. The most recent one sent just before I caught her in the garage. "You looked amazing tonight. I can't stop thinking about you." My stomach churned as I scrolled up, each message worse than the last. They weren't just texts, they were conversations full of inside jokes, flirtations, and plans. Plans for nights I hadn't known she'd gone out. Plans for afternoons when I'd thought she was working. And then the pictures. They weren't graphic, but they didn't need to be. The way she smiled at the camera, the way she posed, it wasn't for me. I felt sick. My hands trembled as I put the phone back where I'd found it and sat on the edge of the bed. I had my proof. Megan came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, her hair wrapped in a towel. She smiled at me like everything was normal, like we hadn't crossed some invisible line the night before. But I couldn't keep it in. "Who's KP?" I asked, my voice flat. Her smile vanished, replaced by something cold and defensive. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the messages," I said, standing up. "I know." Her face went pale, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, she laughed, a bitter, forced laugh that made my skin crawl. "So now you're spying on me," she said, crossing her arms. "Real mature, Dave." "Don't turn this around on me," I snapped. "I trusted you, Megan. I trusted you, and you threw it all away for, what? For him?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she sighed and sat down on the bed, her shoulders slumping. "It's not what you think," she said quietly. "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think." She didn't answer, just stared at the floor. "I deserve the truth," I said, my voice cracking. "After everything we've been through, the least you can do is give me that." Finally, she looked up, her eyes glassy. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "It just did." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "How long?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of sneaking around behind my back. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the tears on my cheeks. "Megan," I said, shaking my head, "how could you do this to us? To our family?" She didn't answer. And in that silence, I realized something. This wasn't just about her. This was about me, too. About what I was willing to tolerate. And I wasn't willing to tolerate this. I wasn't going to let her sit there and wallow in silence. I'd spent years building this family, sacrificing and working to create a life that she clearly didn't value. If Megan thought she could brush this off with vague excuses and half-baked apologies, she had no idea what was coming. "You're going to explain this, Megan," I said, pacing the bedroom like a caged animal. "I'm not letting this slide." She looked up at me with those glassy eyes, but there was no sorrow in them, just a pathetic attempt at sympathy. "I told you, it wasn't planned," she repeated, as if that absolved her. "I didn't wake up one day and decide to betray you. Things just happened." I stopped pacing and stared at her. "Things happened? That's your excuse? You're telling me you accidentally carried on an affair for 6 months? You must think I'm a complete idiot." She flinched at my words but didn't argue. That infuriated me even more. "Who is he?" I demanded, stepping closer. Her eyes darted away, focusing on the wall behind me. "You don't know him," she muttered. "Try me," I shot back. She hesitated, but then, with a resigned sigh, she said, "Kevin." Kevin. The name felt like a slap to the face. "And who the hell is Kevin?" I asked, my voice rising. "Someone from your freelance gigs? A random guy you met at a coffee shop? Or is he someone I actually know?" She stood up suddenly, as if she couldn't stand the pressure of sitting anymore. He's someone I met through work," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Through work," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "That's perfect. So while I've been busting my ass to keep this family afloat, you've been screwing around with some guy from work?" "It wasn't like that," she snapped, the first hint of anger breaking through her facade. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, stepping closer. "You're a liar, Megan. A cheat. You've been living a double life while pretending everything was fine at home. So go ahead, enlighten me. Make me understand." She threw her hands up in frustration. "I was lonely, okay? You were always working late, always preoccupied. And Kevin, he listened. He made me feel appreciated." "Lonely?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You're blaming me for this? For your decision to betray our marriage?" "I'm not blaming you," she shouted, but the way her eyes darted told me otherwise. "I'm just saying, things weren't perfect between us. And Kevin, he was just there at the right time." "You mean the wrong time," I corrected her. "And spare me the excuses. If you were so damn lonely, you could have talked to me about it. You could have gone to therapy. Hell, you could have done literally anything other than jump into bed with another man." She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, as if she couldn't think of a counterargument. I pressed on, my anger boiling over. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Megan? To me? To the kids? You've shattered everything we built together, all for some fling." "It wasn't a fling," she said quietly, her voice shaking. I thought I had feelings for him." That hit me like a punch to the gut. Feelings? This wasn't just about sex, it was about emotional betrayal, too. "And now?" I asked, my tone cold. "Do you still have feelings for him?" She hesitated again, and that was all the answer I needed. I laughed bitterly, running a hand through my hair. "Unbelievable. You're standing here, admitting you had an affair, and you can't even tell me you're done with him?" "It's not that simple," she said, tears streaming down her face. "No, it's really simple," I snapped. "You either end it, or we're done. And honestly, I don't know if I can ever forgive you even if you do." She looked at me, her face pale and tear-streaked. "I'm sorry, Dave. I really am. I never meant to hurt you." "Don't apologize," I said, my voice hard. "Apologies mean nothing when the damage is already done." We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, the storm outside still raging as if mirroring the chaos inside. Finally, I broke the silence. "Does he know you're married?" I asked. She nodded. "He knows. And he didn't care?" She shook her head. "No, he didn't. Of course, he didn't. Why would he? He wasn't the one with a family on the line. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You're going to call him. Right now. And you're going to tell him it's over." Her eyes widened. "Dave." "No," I cut her off. "You don't get to negotiate. You've already made enough decisions without consulting me. Now, you're going to do this, or I'm walking out that door, and I'm taking the kids with me." She hesitated, but eventually, she reached for her phone. Her hands were shaking as she dialed his number, and I could hear her breath hitch as it rang. When he answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Kevin, we need to talk." I stood there, arms crossed, watching as she stumbled through her words, telling him it was over, that they couldn't see each other anymore. She avoided my gaze the entire time, but I didn't care. This wasn't about her feelings anymore, it was about reclaiming some shred of dignity for myself and our family. When she hung up, she looked at me, waiting for some kind of response. But I didn't have one. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her guilt. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Megan was in the guest room, but it didn't matter, her presence still filled the house, suffocating me. The storm outside had calmed, but inside me, it raged on. I lay there in our bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. I thought I had feelings for him. How do you come back from that? How do you repair something so utterly shattered? I wasn't sure I even wanted to. When the sun finally rose, I got up and made myself a pot of coffee. The house was quiet, and for a moment, I savored the calm before the inevitable storm of conversations and decisions. But as I stared out the kitchen window, an idea began to form. A way to take control, to even the playing field Megan had so arrogantly tilted in her favor. She had humiliated me, lied to me, and destroyed the life we'd built together. It was time for her to feel the consequences. The first step was gathering my evidence. While she was still in the guest room, I went back to her phone. It wasn't locked this time, she'd left it on the nightstand, probably too exhausted from the confrontation to remember. I opened the messages with Kevin and started taking screenshots, documenting everything. There were pictures of them together at restaurants, on what looked like weekend getaways, trips she had passed off as work-related. There were messages detailing their plans, some romantic, others explicit. By the time I finished, my stomach churned with anger and disgust, but I was resolved. The next step was calling my lawyer. I'd never needed one for personal matters before, but I wasn't about to navigate this mess without backup. I explained everything, Megan's affair, the texts, the pictures, and asked for advice on how to protect myself and the kids. "She's the one who broke the marriage," my lawyer said. "This gives you leverage. If you're thinking of divorce, we can use this." Divorce wasn't something I'd fully committed to yet, but I needed options. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing with possibilities. When Megan finally emerged from the guest room, she looked as miserable as I felt. Her eyes were puffy, and she didn't say a word as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "We need to talk about the kids," I said, breaking the silence. She froze, then nodded. "Okay. I'm not going to drag them into this mess," I continued. "They don't deserve that. But if you think for a second I'm going to let them stay in this house with someone who prioritizes her fling over her family, you're out of your mind." Her face crumpled. "Dave, I'm sorry." Save it," I interrupted. "Sorry doesn't fix this. I'm making plans, Megan. Whether you're a part of them or not depends entirely on what you do from here on out." I could see the fear in her eyes, but I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. That afternoon, I went to my best friend, Eric. He was the only person I trusted to help me with what I was planning. "I need your help," I told him bluntly. Eric didn't ask questions. He just nodded. Over the next few days, I put my plan into action. While Megan tried to act normal, cooking dinner, helping the kids with homework, I was laying the groundwork for something she wouldn't see coming. The first thing I did was contact her employer. Using the evidence I'd gathered, I let them know exactly what had been going on during her work trips. Kevin wasn't just her affair partner, he was also a contractor for the company. The HR rep I spoke to didn't seem thrilled about the situation, especially when I mentioned I had proof. "We'll look into this," she said curtly. Next, I contacted Kevin's wife. I'd found her number in one of Megan's texts, where she and Kevin had joked about keeping their spouses in the dark. It was an awkward conversation, but she deserved to know. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I have pictures," I said. "If you want, I can send them to you." There was a long pause. Then, quietly, she said, "Yes. Please." I sent her everything, along with my sympathies. Whatever she chose to do with the information was her decision. Finally, I made one last move. On a Saturday morning, while Megan was out grocery shopping, I packed a few of her things into a suitcase and set it by the front door. When she came home, I was sitting in the living room, waiting. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're leaving," I said simply. Her face crumpled again. "Dave, please. Let's talk about this." "We already talked," I said. "You made your choices, Megan. Now I'm making mine." She looked at the suitcase, then back at me. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Not my problem," I said coldly. "But you're not staying here." She pleaded with me for nearly an hour, but I didn't budge. Eventually, she picked up the suitcase and left, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, anger, and a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't how I'd envisioned my life turning out, but at least now, I was the one in control. The silence in the house after Megan left was oppressive, but it gave me time to think, to process everything that had happened over the last few days. I needed clarity. The kids would be home the following day, and I had to figure out how to explain things to them. I had been living in a whirlwind of betrayal and anger, but something else was beginning to seep in: exhaustion. Revenge had been satisfying in the moment, but it didn't erase the gaping hole Megan's actions had torn in my life. The next day, Megan called. I let it ring twice before picking up. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. "Dave, please. Can we meet? Just to talk. There's so much I need to say." I considered refusing but decided against it. Maybe I needed this conversation as much as she did. "Fine. Today. Noon. The diner on 5th. When I arrived at the diner, she was already there, sitting in a booth by the window. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had finally crushed the confident woman I had once known. I slid into the seat across from her without saying a word. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice trembling. "Let's get to it," I replied, cutting off any pleasantries. She took a deep breath. "Dave, I'm so sorry. I know I've destroyed everything, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to understand why it happened." "Why it happened?" I echoed, shaking my head. "You think there's an explanation that makes this okay? Go on, Megan. Enlighten me." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. "I felt invisible," she began. "You were always working, always focused on providing for the family. I know you did it for us, but I felt like I didn't matter to you anymore." "Invisible?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think I didn't notice you? I've spent the last 12 years building a life for us, working late, yes, but always making sure you and the kids had everything you needed. And you repay me by crawling into bed with someone else?" "I didn't plan for it to happen," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Kevin was just there. He made me feel special again, like I mattered." I leaned forward, my jaw clenched. "You mattered, Megan. You mattered to me, to the kids, to our entire family. But instead of telling me how you felt, you decided to blow up everything we had for some cheap thrill." She flinched, but I didn't care. "I wasn't done. Do you even realize what you've done? The damage you've caused? The kids are going to find out, Megan. They're going to know their mother is a liar and a cheater. Is that what you wanted?" "No," she cried. I didn't want this. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But it did, I said coldly. And now we have to deal with the fallout. She wiped her eyes with a napkin, her hands trembling. I want to fix things, Dave. I want to try to save our marriage. I laughed bitterly. Save our marriage? Megan, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of deliberate choices over the course of 6 months. You lied to my face, snuck around behind my back, and prioritized your feelings over our family. There's nothing left to save. Her face crumpled, but I pressed on. I loved you, Megan. I trusted you completely. And you took that trust and smashed it into pieces. You don't come back from that. Not in my book. She reached across the table, her hand trembling. Please, Dave. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Just give me a chance to prove I can change. I stared at her hand for a long moment before pulling mine away. It's too late, I said quietly. You made your choices, Megan. And now I'm making mine. I'm filing for divorce. Her face went pale. No. Please, don't do this. Think about the kids. Think about everything we've been through together. I have thought about the kids, I said. And the best thing I can do for them is show them that actions have consequences. That trust is sacred, and once it's broken, it can't always be repaired. She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. People in the diner were starting to stare, but I didn't care. This isn't just about us, she said between sobs. This is about our family. Can't you at least try? I shook my head. I tried, Megan. I gave you 12 years of my life. I built a home for us, a future. And you threw it away. I'm done. She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. What about the kids? What are you going to tell them? The truth, I said. That their mother made a choice that destroyed our family. I won't lie for you, Megan. Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I stood up, throwing a few bills on the table. I've said everything I needed to say. The next time you hear from me, it'll be through my lawyer. She reached for me, but I stepped back. Goodbye, Megan. As I walked out of the diner, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of the last few days was still there, but it was lighter now. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. This wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the life I had now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control. After the diner confrontation, there was no turning back. Megan called and texted incessantly, alternating between begging for another chance and accusing me of overreacting. I ignored most of her messages, replying only to clarify logistics for the kids. My focus had shifted entirely to building a stable future for them and myself. The kids returned home a few days after Megan left. I met them at my parents' house, grateful for the chance to prepare for the inevitable conversation. I couldn't keep the truth from them, but I also didn't want to traumatize them. They were young, just 10 and 8, but old enough to know something was wrong. Lily, the oldest, was the first to speak up. Dad, where's Mom? Why isn't she here? I knelt in front of them, choosing my words carefully. Your mom and I are going through a hard time right now. We've decided it's best to live apart for a while. Sam, my youngest, scrunched his face in confusion. Why? Did you have a fight? I took a deep breath. It's more complicated than that, buddy. Sometimes adults make mistakes, and those mistakes can hurt the people they care about. But I want you both to know that none of this is your fault, okay? Your mom and I love you very much, and that will never change. Lily's eyes welled up with tears. Is this about those nights when she wasn't home? I heard her talking on the phone once. She sounded different. Not like Mom. The lump in my throat grew larger. I can't go into all the details right now, Lily, but yes, some of this has to do with choices your mom made. She and I both need time to figure things out. Sam frowned. So you're not going to be together anymore? I couldn't bring myself to say the word divorce yet, so I said, we're working on what's best for all of us. No matter what happens, we'll still be a family. It'll just look a little different. They didn't ask any more questions, but their sadness was palpable. I hugged them tightly, promising them we'd get through this together. The divorce process began in earnest. My lawyer was aggressive, ensuring Megan's infidelity was well documented in the filings. I wasn't out to destroy her, but I also wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. Megan fought back, of course. She argued for joint custody, claiming she wanted to be an active part of the kids' lives. But her actions spoke louder than her words. While she occasionally picked them up for outings, she always seemed distracted, her phone a constant presence. I wondered if she was still in contact with Kevin, despite her earlier promises to cut ties. Our court date came quickly, and the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of Lily and Sam, with Megan receiving visitation rights. She seemed crushed by the decision, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her bed, now she had to lie in it. The first weeks without Megan were difficult. The house felt emptier, quieter, despite the kids' presence. I kept myself busy with work and household projects, but the loneliness crept in at night. There were moments when I questioned whether I'd made the right decision. Could we have salvaged the marriage if I tried harder? But then I'd remember the texts, the pictures, the nights she'd come home late, reeking of betrayal. No, I'd made the only decision I could. One evening, months after the divorce was finalized, Megan came by to pick up the kids for her weekend visitation. She lingered in the doorway after they ran to the car. Dave, she said hesitantly, can we talk for a minute? I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. What is it? She looked down at her feet, her confidence gone. I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. And I know it's too late, but I needed you to hear it. I stared at her, searching for sincerity in her eyes. She seemed genuine, but the apology felt hollow. It was too little, too late. I appreciate the apology, I said finally. But it doesn't change anything. The damage is done. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I know. I hope one day, you can forgive me. Forgiveness. I wasn't there yet, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. But I didn't tell her that. I'll see you Sunday when you drop off the kids, I said, stepping back and closing the door. Life slowly began to stabilize. The kids adjusted to the new routine, and I focused on being the best father I could be. I poured my energy into their activities, helping Lily with her science projects and coaching Sam's soccer team. Eventually, I started dating again. It wasn't easy, trust didn't come naturally anymore, but I refused to let Megan's betrayal define the rest of my life. One night, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat on the porch with a beer, reflecting on everything that had happened. Megan's affair had been a turning point, a painful chapter that forced me to confront the cracks in my life and rebuild from the ground up. I didn't see it as a blessing in disguise or any of that nonsense. It was just life, messy, unfair, and sometimes downright cruel. But it was mine, and I was determined to make the best of it. As I finished my beer and headed inside, I felt a sense of closure. The wounds Megan had left were still there, but they were healing, slowly but surely. This wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it was a future I could live with. One day at a time, I was moving forward.